Good evening. Welcome to the May 5th meeting of the Planning Commission. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Lefevers.
Here.
Commissioner Benefield.
Here.
Commissioner Van Antwerp.
Here.
Vice Chair Moyer.
Here.
And Chair Allen.
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have introductions, presentations, or announcements?
Thank you, Chair. I do have one introduction for you. I wanted to take just a brief moment tonight to introduce you to our new principal planner. His name is Brett McNulty, and he's taken over for Brian Banks, who has gone back to the private sector. So Brett started with us just last week. He comes to us with over 20 years' experience in both the public sector and the private sector, and we're excited to have him along. And I invite him to come up and say a couple words if he'd like to.
Welcome.
Thank you. The button. There we go. Chair Allen, members of the Planning Commission, I'm really happy to be here and to work for such a great city. I look forward to working with you as projects come through and hearing your thoughts about the way the city should develop or preserve or whatever projects you're working on. Let me know if you'd ever have any questions or would like to meet about anything. I'm available. And if you have any questions for me now, I'm happy to answer.
Where did you work?
Previously, I was a planning consultant, my own business. I worked for cities such as San Marino, City of Goleta. Prior to that, I worked for a company called Recon in Goleta. And prior to that, I worked for the County of Santa Barbara for 7.5 years, as well as working in Northern California for various agencies. So I'm happy to be here.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much.
Welcome. Okay. Okay, now is the time for public comment on matters that are not on this evening's agenda. So if there's any member of the public that would like to address us on any such matter, now's the time to come forward. Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the consent calendar. There's one item, the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting of April 7th. Commissioners, are there any comments, changes that need to be made?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, aye.
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 I wasn't present at that meeting.
Okay, you're abstaining?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the next item is the decommissioning and remediation of the Chevron Carpinteria Oil and Gas Processing Facility project. I am excusing myself from hearing that project. I will be leaving the meeting room. I have a conflict under the law. I reside within 500 feet of the Chevron property. So I'll be stepping out of the room, and as a matter of personal convenience, I'm not going to return for the last couple of housekeeping items. So, John, the meeting's yours. See you. Have a good evening. Yeah. See you.
Good idea.
Little switcheroo. Can you hear me? Does everybody hear me? Great. So, this is the decommissioning and remediation of the Chevron Carpinteria Oil and Gas Processing Facility project. Do you have any ex parte communication?
I have two things to disclose. First of all, I want to disclose that I was previously employed by Sempra and SoCalGas, which own a number of facilities on the perimeter of this project, surrounding area. It's my understanding that the decommissioning of the facilities under this project is not contemplated, and that Sempra nor SoCalGas are project applicants. The FPPC's regulations provide guidance when a decision may have a material effect on a public official's financial interest. Based on my review of these regulations and conversations with the City Attorney's Office, the Commission's action on this item tonight would not have a material effect on my financial interest. As a result, I plan to participate in today's meeting fully. And secondly, I would also like to disclose that I have visited the site and on a number of occasions, and thank you.
Okay, I had the opportunity gratefully to tour the area with the applicants and the facilities manager. And there were 4 gentlemen, and they were Ryan Jones, Kevin Dugain, is that right?
Dugan, yes.
Dugan, sorry. Simon Poltier and Mark. That's it. And they gave me a tour of the area. It was extremely helpful for orienting myself. This is a very big project, and I want to thank them. I think they're, well, that I won't tell you what I think. It's all good, but that's it.
I also toured the facility with Kevin and Mark and Ryan and Simon last week, and it was very helpful to visually see that area. I had not seen it recently, so thank you.
And I did not. I ride my bike down Dump Road almost every day, but, yeah. And, okay, so now we're ready for the public hearing.
Thank you, Vice Chair Moyer. Just before we get started, I wanted to make a couple of introductions for the benefit of your commission. So from our City Attorney's Office, we have Cody Sargent here to help answer any technical questions on the project. And then the city's consultant on this project is Luis Perez with MRS Environmental. And Luis is going to be taking the lead on the presentation tonight to walk you through the project and the EIR.
Thank you, Nick. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Luis Perez, Project Manager with MRS Environmental. Let me go to the next slide. So tonight we'll briefly go through the purpose of the hearing. Then we'll do an overview of the proposed project, and then we'll spend some time on the final EIR and the components of that environmental document. And then we'll move into the staff recommendation later on in the presentation. As I mentioned tonight, what we'll try to accomplish is we'll review the final EIR and the proposed project. We will allow, obviously, for public comments so that the public has an opportunity to present their questions and concerns on the project. And then we'll attempt to respond to those issues and concerns. Hopefully, we'll get to certify the final EIR, and the Planning Commission will get to accept the resolution and statement of overriding considerations and subsequently approve the development plan and the coastal development permit. So a little bit of background, the application timeline. The application was originally submitted by Chevron in October of 2021, and then was found complete in March of 2022. It has been a long, exhaustive process that has looked at all the issues that resulted in the environmental document that is before you tonight. The notice of preparation was issued on August 1st. And the draft EIR was completed in November of 2023, and it had a 60-day public comment period, allowing ample opportunity for the public to comment on this important project. The close of the public comment period was in January, at the end of January 2024, and now April 2025, we had the final EIR released for review. and obviously leads us to tonight. Again, a little bit more background with regards to the historical use of the site. There's been oil and gas processing equipment at this site since the 1950s. It was used to handle offshore production from the Summerlin field, and it began and it received first oil from Platform Hazel in 1959. It processed up to 20,000 barrels of oil per day and 20 million standard cubic feet per day of natural gas. Again, the facility consisted of offices, pipelines from offshore platforms, processing and storage facilities. The processed gas went to the SoCal Gas Network, and oil was shipped from the facility to other pipelines down south to Ventura and beyond. Now to the proposed project, and I wanted to point out that before we get into the details of the onshore and offshore project, is that the proposed project does not include any potential future use of the site. And, we saw that in a number of the comments that we received on the environmental document and subsequently to that. So I just wanted to make clear up front that there is no proposed development on the site. And any proposed development on the site will be speculative at this point and therefore is not subject to environmental review. At some later date, the city is undergoing their general plan amendment, and some discussion would occur there as to what the future use of the site will be. And subsequent to that, there will be some sort of application and environmental review for whatever potential future use there will be. We should also mention that the project is fairly extensive and is slated to occur in phases and last approximately 3 years. So with that, the slide that you have in front of you talks about the main things that will occur as part of the onshore project. There will be removal of all existing above-ground facilities and also subsurface piping and all structures. All the concrete foundations will be removed. The asphalt, oil spray, and road base will be removed. And then there will be excavation and remediation of all impacted soils in accordance to a facility remedial action plan. There will be recycling and disposal of all materials removed, and there will be restoration of the site in accordance with the site restoration plan. So this figure, which is also part of your package, shows all the onshore areas that are slated for decommissioning and removal. And it's probably a lot easier to see in your figures than it is in this depiction, but we wanted to put it up anyway. As far as the proposed project offshore, all the pipelines will be pigged and flushed. Pigging is an effort that puts an element through the line to clean it. They will be prepared for removal. Then the pipelines will be removed to the 3 nautical mile state water limit. And then subsequently, the nearshore beach crossing pipeline segments will be removed. There will be recycling and disposal of all the materials removed and restoration in accordance with, again, the site restoration plan. Also, the offshore portions of the project are under permit jurisdiction by the Coastal Commission that would also have to take action on the project after the city takes its action. And again, we have a series of the figure that shows you all the facilities that are slated for decommissioning offshore and coming into the onshore areas. There are a number of facilities that will remain on site. They're not proposed for decommissioning, and they're not proposed for decommissioning for a variety of reasons, and we'll try to touch on those in a minute. In particular, the Chevron has not proposed the removal of any of the gas company facilities, the sales gas facility in the peninsula area and the Peters Point facility, which is at the end of the marketing terminal site. There are also a number of historic on-site idle wells. Those wells were not drilled by Chevron, and it preceded their ownership of those facilities. And we will talk a little bit more about those legacy wells later on in the presentation as we discuss the full removal alternative. Also, there is no proposal to deal with the naturally occurring oil seeps, and we will talk a little bit about those later. They're naturally occurring, and they're considered part of the natural environment. And as you all know, in this area, we have a number of oil seeps, and attempting to remediate those, it's at times problematic. Also, offshore, there is a gas pipeline that comes onto the facility area from platform habitat that is not owned by Chevron and therefore not their responsibility, and they're not proposing to do anything with that pipeline. And then there is the platform Hazel and Haiti pipelines offshore, and those were abandoned in place and under previous approval by California State Lands Commission. However, we will talk about those later because they will be part of the proposed recommendation from staff, and it's also part of an alternative that we analyzed in the EIR. And then finally, there are some power cables from platforms Hogan and Hutchin that also come into the facility, but again, they're not Chevron's ownership and therefore not the responsibility of Chevron to decommission. So moving on to the EIR itself, the EIR is an informational document for decision makers to be able to make decisions and for the public to understand what the impacts of a project are. It provides detailed information on the baseline, what is there now before you conduct the project. The EIR identifies and assesses what the environmental impacts of the proposed action is, what would happen if you do the activities that are proposed there. It also provides a number of mitigation measures to ensure that whatever impacts that occur are properly mitigated. And it also identifies alternatives. Are there other things that could be done on this site that would diminish the number of impacts that occur? And we also are required to select an environmentally superior alternative. Environmental documents for decommissioning projects are a little bit different than for development projects. You do not have a lot of choices. When you're doing a development project, you have a series of alternatives that you can come up with as to whether you can construct a hotel that is bigger, smaller, a different type of development. When you have a decommissioning project, you're set to what the proposed project is, and the level of creativity for what you can do to decommission the site is fairly limited. So the EIR, which I'm sure you all have taken a look at, has a number of chapters. Excuse me. One is the executive summary that provides you with basically a synopsis of what's in the document. We're required to have it, but we also encourage folks to look at the document in detail if you're interested in more detail, because not all of it can be included in that executive summary. There are impact summary tables. It contains an introduction, a full project description. It also talks about cumulative project description. And then it has a chapter 4, which has all the environmental analysis and the mitigation measures. Chapter 5 then goes into the alternatives analysis. And finally, you get to the mitigation monitoring program and all the appendices. So in this slide, you see the issue areas that we looked at as part of the environmental document as required by CEQA. And, we looked at aesthetics, air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, climate change, safety, risk of upset, and so on, all the potential issues that could be affected by the project during the project execution. Throughout the EIR, we then define what kind of impact can occur in each one of these issue areas. And the type of impacts that could occur are either significant and unavoidable or class 1 impacts. And those impacts are the impacts that cannot be fully mitigated. Doesn't matter what you do, the impact is not mitigable. There are also less than significant impacts with mitigation or class 2 impacts. And these impacts are significant, but they can be mitigated with mitigation measures. And then finally, there are less than significant impacts or class 3 adverse but insignificant. So significant and unavoidable impacts or class 1 impacts were found in the following issue areas. And keep in mind that this is a worst case scenario. So we have to try to analyze what is the potential, what is it that could possibly happen, not necessarily what will happen. So it is a conservative approach to analysis, and with the interest of divulging to the public and decision makers what could happen as a result of implementing the project. In this particular case, we have a safety and risk class 1 environmental impact that is related to the potential for an oil spill to occur during the time that they're doing the decommissioning of activities. These are all facilities that have long been in disuse, and there could be potential releases of hydrocarbons during the time that the project is being conducted. As a result of those potential oil spill releases, you can have impacts onto biological resources or water resources. And so those are the resources that could potentially be affected by the potential oil spills. So what we have here is what we described, again, conservatively as 3 significant and unavoidable impacts, but they're really one and the one and only potential significant and unavoidable impact, which is the risk of an oil spill. And the fact is that we have to analyze it in the other issue areas because those are the issue areas that could be affected by that potential oil spill. So in order to mitigate those impacts, although we claim that they are class 1 and mitigable, we also are required to come up with mitigation measures to try to diminish the level of impact in as much as is possible. And so for those particular impacts, we have a mitigation measure of a spill response planning. We also have in biology an oil spill contingency plan, and for water resources, a stormwater pollution prevention plan. And we try to diminish the level of impact in as much as can possibly be managed with these plans, but we still feel that even with all of those, if there is an oil spill in the ocean or into resources, there could be significant and unavoidable impacts. Then we have significant and mitigable impacts. So this is where, again, you have impacts that could be adverse, but if we implement all these mitigation measures, we feel that these impacts can be reduced to less than significant. And here we have some impacts on aesthetics. In this particular case, is related to lighting. So we have a night lighting minimization plan. In biology, we have the potential to affect sensitive species. And so we have a series of requirements that include a number of agency approvals, and this project will be subject to permits by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It will be required to be permitted again by the Coastal Commission. NOAA will have to provide some permits for the project, and a number of other approvals will be necessary. So it is not just the city that will be acting on this, but others also have responsibilities for this multi-jurisdictional project. There are requirements for habitat restoration and revegetation plans, pre-construction wildlife surveys. There will be fencing to separate the areas where the work would occur, a worker education and awareness plan, also marine wildlife contingency and training plan implementation, both for things that would happen onshore and also for the efforts that would occur offshore. There is also a harbor seal rookery monitoring and protection plan and a wildlife relocation and monitoring program. For Bio 2, we have adverse effects on riparian habitats, and again, we have environmentally sensitive habitat impact avoidance, scrub mitigation, and essential fish habitat avoidance as mitigation measures. And then for Biology 3, adverse effect on protected wetlands, we have the requirements of regional water and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Department of Fish and Wildlife regulations. In compliance with those, we have wetlands pre-construction surveys, coastal wetlands mitigation plans. And then finally, for Bio 5, we have tree preservation policy, which requires tree removal mitigation when that occurs. Also, we have some significant and mitigable impacts on cultural resources. There are cultural resources on the site, and so there will be a requirement of a cultural resources management plan, workers' cultural resources awareness, cultural resources monitoring, exclusion zones, data recovery of excavations, curation of project materials, and then if human remains are found, the requirements for on-call forensic anthropologists to be on site, and then human remains discovery program. Also, Class 2 impacts are likely to occur on greenhouse gas emissions, so there's a requirement for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. There is some geology impacts on soil erosion and siltation, and so there is a requirement for erosion control best management practices. There are also potential for bluff impacts as a result of the pipeline removal through the bluffs. And so there is a requirement for a bluff stabilization plan, and then bluff stabilization during the pipeline removal. And then subsequent to that, there is bluff stabilization following the pipeline removal. Because some of the material that comes out of the site is contaminated, there will be potential impacts as a result of transportation of those hazardous materials. So the applicant will be required to prepare a contaminated soil handling program. And then there's a potential for fire risks, so you will have a mitigation measure of fire response planning. And then also for noise, there will be some temporary noise increases, and so there'll be a requirement for noise barriers, monitoring, and then some curtailment of nighttime activities to prevent those impacts. So that's a very fast overview of a very extensive environmental document, and obviously, if you have questions on any specific issue areas or any specific impact or any specific mitigation measure, we'll try to respond to those. We move on to the alternatives, and with regards to alternatives, CEQA requires you to look at any alternative that continues to meet the objectives of the project, but that reduces impacts to less than significant. And so in an attempt to do that, we look at, okay, what can be done on this site, again, with the limitations that I spoke of earlier as to how limited you are with a decommissioning project. CEQA requires you to look at what are the impacts of a no project alternative, and that means what happens if you do not conduct the project. If the project does not move forward, what are the impacts of that? So those are analyzed in the environmental document. We came up with a full removal alternative, and we defined that as removing all the facilities that could possibly be removed that are on site. And so in doing so, we included the legacy wells that are within the facility. We also included trying to remediate some of those seeps, natural occurring seeps that are on the site, and we also included removal of the pipelines that were not previously included by Chevron, the Hazel and Heidi pipelines. So in the process of including that in the environmental document, in the draft EIR, we received comments from both CalGEM and from the Department of Conservation, who are the ones that typically oversee the decommissioning and plugging and abandonment of oil wells. And we also heard from the Coastal Commission with regards to the oil seeps. In the case of the legacy wells, CalGEM made it clear that there was no regulatory requirement to compel Chevron to abandon those wells at this time. They're not intending to do anything to the site that could affect those wells, and so it was not feasible to include that as part of the project alternative, this project alternative. Similarly, the Coastal Commission, in their comment letter, stated that they felt that the naturally occurring seeps were part of the natural environment, part of the natural baseline conditions, and that there would be no requirement, or there was no requirement for the applicant to address those. So in the process of preparing the final EIR, between the draft and the final, we came up with a new alternative, which is the proposed project, so all the things that we discussed earlier, plus including the Hilda and Hazel pipeline removal alternative. And so this is the new alternative that is described in the final EIR. And then there were a number of other alternatives that we considered, but we eliminated them because either they did not meet the objectives of the project or they could potentially have more environmental impacts. And those were the removal of offshore only alternative, and obviously if you only remove the items that are offshore, you would still have all the items onshore remaining, so it wouldn't complete the project. And then the same would be the case for removal of onshore only. And then we also looked at the potential for reducing impacts on the trucking destinations as an alternative. And again, we didn't find any value in pursuing those. So after reviewing all the alternatives and looking at all the potential environmental impacts, we, and this is kind of a difficult table to read, particularly at this size, but it is part of the environmental document. It is in the final EIR, page 5-14. And what we tried to do is compare the impacts of the proposed project, then to the no project, the full removal alternative, and then the project plus Hilda and Hazel pipelines alternative. And as you can see, and there is a substantial discussion within the document in Chapter 5 that talks about this, but this is the synoptic version of it. The impacts of the proposed project versus the proposed project plus Hilda and Hazel pipeline removal alternative are very similar. There is a slight advantage in the geology because with the Hilda and Hazel removal, you have the reduction of the geological impacts of removing the potential for future erosion of the bluffs. And so they're very similar, but the addition of removal of those additional pipelines makes that alternative the environmentally superior alternative. And basically, I got ahead of myself, and this slide has that discussion. Again, the full removal alternative is not considered feasible at this point. There are no regulatory requirements for this alternative, and so we could not consider it to be environmentally superior. And then, although they have similar levels of impacts, we found that Hilda and Hazel pipeline removal alternative results in it being environmentally superior. Now we move on to the statement of overriding considerations. And what this is that CEQA requires a decision maker to adopt a statement of overriding considerations if you're approving a project that has significant and unavoidable impacts. Again, we mentioned that those are related to oil spill and then the potential for water resources and biological resources to be affected by that potential oil spill. What we do with the statement of overriding considerations is we try to come up with reasons why we feel that the decision makers should be compelled to approve the project regardless of the potential for those significant and avoidable impacts. And in this particular case, it is fairly obvious that a project that is attempting to remediate contaminated soil, a project that is taking out dilapidated, unused facilities that are an eyesore, facilities that taking out facilities that are going through the bluffs, that could contribute to deterioration, erosion in the future, have a number of beneficial effects. And so in writing the statement of overriding consideration, we have included all of those, and those are part of your resolution, and they're written in far more detail in your staff report package. But I just wanted to point out what those were and the reasoning behind them. We also looked at the consistency with the zoning code. The site is zone MCD and REC, and it's within the coastal appeals, which means that the final city action is appealable to the Coastal Commission. It is also within environmentally sensitive habitat, and so it meets the coastal plan development standards. It is consistent with zoning requirements through application of all the EIR mitigation measures that we discussed previously. And then it has a number of beneficial effects after the project completion. And so staff concludes that required DP, CDP findings for approval can be made. Similarly, for the general plan and coastal land use plan, there is a complete analysis in the staff report, and there's a preliminary one within the final EIR that provides the applicable policies and the consistency with those applicable policies. There are beneficial long-term effects of completing the decommissioning and remediation project, and adherence to the EIR mitigation measure ensures consistency with the intent of those policies. Also, when we talked about all the mitigation measures, all those mitigation measures become conditions of approval, and those are also part of your package. And so there are a number of conditions of approval. You have all the EIR mitigation measures are included within there. There is a requirement for a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan. There is a requirement for an environmental compliance monitor, so all the items that are being conducted, that are proposed to be conducted by Chevron, will also have oversight by the city to ensure that they're complying with all the conditions appropriately. There's requirements for site maintenance. There are also requirements for an engineering permit for all the earthwork and excavation. There's a traffic management plan. We also received a letter from the Air Pollution Control District with their requirements, some of which are already included as part of the EIR, but they're also included in your package as required by the APCD. And then there are a number of regulatory agency permits and approvals that we mentioned before. So with that, the recommendation from staff is to adopt the attached resolution, PC-25-001. And with that, accepting and certifying the environmental impact report for the project as having satisfied the procedural and statutory requirements of CEQA as amended. And we found that there was a typo on the table that I showed you earlier with the comparison of the alternatives and environmentally superior alternative, and that's table 5.2 and ES3. There was an added numeral 1 in there in the environmental document, so we want to correct that for the final. And then selecting the proposed project plus Hilda and Hazel pipeline removal alternative as the preferred project, and adopting the attached resolution approving the development plan and coastal development permit number 21-2128 DP-CDP. And I think that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. It was very thorough. So now we'll have questions from commissioners. Glenn?
Thank you. I just have a few questions, and try to be as concise as I can. And if you're not able to, if staff's not able to answer them, perhaps the project applicant, after the public hearing is opened, would take a shot at them. So I guess the first question I want to get clarity on has to do with the Harbor Seal Rookery Monitoring Plan. And this issue appears in the EIR document as well as in the conditions of approval for the development permit. It's condition 10, I believe. And my question is, it seems inconsistent, and I'm trying to get clarity. The timing of implementation of that mitigation measure, the mitigation measure being the monitoring plan itself, is only required for 6 months of the year. Yet the mitigation itself really talks about any work, within 1,000 feet associated with the project. So, we know that most, if not all, of the work that has the potential to impact the rookery is to be scheduled outside of the 6 months during the season. So my question is that our intent? Is that the intent of the AR to only have monitoring during 6 months, or is monitoring going to occur for the entire duration of the year?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I think the intent is to ensure that monitoring is occurring when the activities are occurring, and I think the crafting of the condition language was designed to ensure that there was no implicit approval that Chevron could conduct those activities outside of those times. But certainly, I can see where there could be some misconception here. So we will work to amend the language to ensure that it is consistent. Does that answer your question?
And just to clarify, I think Luis is meaning consistent with the intent that the mitigation monitoring plan would be implemented when any construction's occurring within 1,000 feet of the rookery.
And not limited to just the November through
That's correct.
May. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. I guess my other question has to do with, Luis, you mentioned this during your staff presentation. As we know, there's a multitude of potential jurisdictional issues associated with the project as a whole. Our action in issuing the permit and certifying the EIR is only one part of that. So my question is, what's the, through the conditional or through the development plan, coastal development permit that is proposed for tonight, what mechanism in there is intended to ensure that all of the other agencies who have involvement or may need to review or issue permits are engaged at the appropriate time and work doesn't proceed without that? As you know, there's a long list in the environmental document of agencies with potential jurisdiction and the kinds of permits that are likely to be required or may be required. My question is, how do we, as the city of Carpinteria, through our action, how do we intend to have some oversight over that and make sure it occurs when it needs to?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, we do have a requirement within condition bio or the mitigation measure bio 1A that requires all these other agency approvals, and the city can certainly request that Chevron provide copies of those approvals at the appropriate times that those activities will be occurring. And I think we can probably add some language to the mitigation monitoring program or within another portion of the document that makes sense within the conditions that ensures that, that they're not conducting any activity that is not permitted by those other agencies.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, perhaps that's something that could be incorporated into the mitigation management monitoring program that's to be developed as part of the conditions of approval. Is that perhaps an area where that might be covered?
That, through the chair, Commissioner Fevers, that's our thinking on this, is that we could amend condition number 40, which requires the MMRP to include that additional language stipulating that copies of all the agency approvals and permits would be provided by the applicant to the city as part of the MMRP.
Okay, thank you. This question is really just perhaps just out of curiosity, but it does have, I think it's relevant for at least discussion. So this has to do with the scheduling of the project activities. In my reading of the project description and the environmental document, it looks like the onshore portion, the plant site portion of the work is and the total project is proposed to occur over a 3-year period. And I believe that includes a relatively small work crew. I think it was 15 people, but I could be incorrect, working in the plant area, sort of counterclockwise or doing remediation work, removal and remediation work. And my question is, was there any discussion with the project applicant about shortening that 3-year period, bringing in more crews to be able to accomplish that work more quickly? I recognize that may have other impacts, more traffic, more, higher concentrations of pollution, those kind of things. But I'm just curious if that item was discussed with the applicant.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, to some extent it was. One of the issues with a project of this magnitude is that there are a lot of variables and a lot of limiting factors. You have monarch butterfly nesting seasons, you have bird nesting seasons, you have the seal rookery limitations. You also have tides that limit when you can conduct some of the work. When some of the work offshore is being conducted, you have limitations of bad weather. And winter months and so on and so forth. So there are quite a few limiting factors out there that create potentially the extension of the project. In analyzing the project, we also believe that the applicant is the most interested party in completing it as soon as possible. And so we do not believe that they're going to be out there longer than necessary. And if it potentially can be shortened, we're sure it would be so. This is a worst case kind of scenario. And so it may be that the project is completed sooner than the 3-year period, depending on, what kind of progress they can make during the times that they have those windows of opportunity. But again, it's complicated by a number of resources and the activities that will be occurring out there.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate those clarifications. That's all my questions for now.
Okay. Jay?
Thank you, Glenn. You asked the questions I had. Thank you for that. I have a question about the 6 on-site wells that are capped or plugged. I'm not sure how you call that, but they're not abandoned. What could happen with those? Can they blow? Are they just there? I mean, what is the potential for a disaster with those 6 wells, if any?
That's an interesting question. The reality is that some of those wells never produced anything. And some of those wells certainly were drilled a long time ago. Some of those wells are very shallow in nature. They're not, the level of potential repressurizing of reservoirs underneath those wells that they all of a sudden could begin producing oil or gas is very unlikely. You cannot unequivocally say nothing will ever happen with those wells, but I think if history has been can give us any proof, is that they have been around now for 70, 80 years and they have not had any issues. Now, they're not plugged and abandoned to today's standards, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are an imminent danger. And so I think in reviewing those wells, CalGEM also has come up to the same conclusion. There's a number of things that could happen. One of the things that could happen is if there is a future owner or a future proposal for some sort of development on the site that could have an effect on the wells, they may be required by CalGEM to plug and abandon those wells. At minimum, they will be required to provide adequate access so that if those wells present a danger in the future, they can be accessible to be plugged and abandoned. There is also an opportunity for the city to, in a future date, to request, as the local jurisdiction, to request CalGEM to include those wells as part of the orphan well abandonment program. The state has funding every year to plug and abandon wells and that are similar to these wells. And so at some point, they would prioritize those wells to determine whether, in fact, they fall within the category of some that should be high priority, and then subsequently use those funds to plug and abandon those wells. Again, I think that from all that we know about these wells, they're very unlikely to present any danger of leakage or release.
And how deep do they go? What's the most shallow?
I think they vary. So,
Because if you're building something that required an understructure, it might affect that.
it's the well itself. Now, I'm looking at table 4.7.1 within the final EIR that discusses the idle wells, and I don't believe we have the depth of the wells. But again, some of these wells were drilled back in 1913.
Year I was born. Not that long ago.
And the one that the youngest one of the wells is from 1951. So again, there's currently no proposal to do anything in the areas where these wells are located, and there are remedies in the future if something is proposed for those wells.
And through the chair, if I can just add to, the city has some experience with the orphan well program with CalGEM, previously for some of the orphan wells that have been drilled in decades past on the sandy beach. And so, I've seen firsthand where, if there is a concern, if there is an alleged, leaking well or a problem, that CalGEM has been responsive and has come out and investigated those and done the due diligence to figure out, is there a leak? Is there a failed, capping of a well? Is it natural seepage? And so on and so forth. So they are responsive to addressing problems with legacy wells if or when something comes up.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And one other question is, who determines when we need an overriding consideration? And who approves that? Is it us? We, the Planning Commission, we approve that? I mean, it's such a backdoor to environmental documents to me. It says, if we're going to make more money doing it this way, then let's do it. I don't mean with yours exactly, but overriding considerations are usually economic. And so who decides when and where and how we're going to do that? Or is it always with Class 1 impacts?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, that's exactly correct. I mean, the law provides, CEQA provides that if you have a significant and unavoidable impact, the decision makers recognize that those impacts are occurring, and as such, you have to come up with a statement that overrides those impacts. So in this particular case, I think it's an easy case to make that the potential temporary impacts that could occur as a result of the project are worth conducting them because you're going to have a beneficial effect of removing those dilapidated facilities and remediating the soil and restoring the site.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, it's a legal requirement of CEQA, and the decision makers, in this case, the Planning Commission, gets to decide whether that statement of overriding consideration can be adopted, whether you feel that what we're stating for you here is adequate, accurate, and correct in offsetting those potential significant and unavoidable impacts.
Thank you. I just have a little more. The bluffs destabilization, what does that mean exactly? When you're pulling the pipes and things out, it has to resettle, or you're filling, or what does it mean?
So the intent is to stabilize the bluff in as much as possible when you're taking the pipelines out. As you know, bluffs are by their nature unstable, and we continue to lose pieces of the bluff as time goes on. There are erosional concerns on the bluffs, and that is throughout California. Having the pipelines in place create an opportunity for water to run above the line. It creates a conduit, so it creates an opportunity for erosion. And so what has been attempted here with the mitigation measure is to ensure that as the project is being conducted, all things that could be taken, all measures that could be taken are taken to reduce the potential for the bluffs to be affected. And then once the pipelines are removed, then you go back and you do whatever you can to ensure that the activities that were conducted are then remedied so that there is less opportunity for destabilization of the bluff.
Okay, I'll not ask you the rest. Thank you.
I have just a few questions. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I understand that the decommissioning and remediation is by Chevron, the goal is for unrestricted land use. And we've talked about bluff stability, we've talked about a lot of the environmental concerns. It's an environmentally sensitive area. And I'd like confirmation on this, that the responsibility for Chevron is, it's about 3 years of actual project work and then 2 years post. Is that correct? So a total of...
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, so there are requirements within the plans for restoration, and some of those may well go beyond that period of time. So I hesitate to suggest that there is a limit on 2 years beyond the completion of the project. There are requirements for those plans, and depending on the level of compliance, they may go on longer.
Okay. So it could be, I guess I'm looking at some precedent setting at the Elwood area up in Goleta, in which the applicant was responsible for a good 10 years. So I'm looking for, where does that responsibility stop post remediation and decommissioning? Sorry if I missed it somewhere.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, the number of years, if I understand your question, I think that, there is still, the remedial action plan is under preparation. We have, in the environmental document, attempted to address the maximum amount of time that it would take to conduct the project itself. But again, for future restoration and, once the project is complete, it depends on what the level of compliance is. And in some cases, it can be completed within the 2-year period. In other cases, it may be longer. I frankly do not recollect the 2-year period beyond the 3 years, so I have to look for that reference in the document. And it may be that it's an isolated reference to a specific plan, but there may be others that go beyond that timeline.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that is I know that Chevron is deeply committed to making sure that this project meets all the required sign-offs, all of the agencies. I understand that. I'm just wondering if something like we're looking at the bluffs as an example, if there is cause for further erosion within a certain period of time, or another issue comes up that's directly related to the project, when does that sense of responsibility stop?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Through the chair, Commissioner, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, what Luis is saying is correct, that there might still be additional compliance required, but I think what you're potentially getting at is sort of what potential liability there would be on the applicant. That wouldn't be necessarily set out in the kind of mitigation monitoring. Certainly if, something occurred with the decommissioning or the applicant's activities on the site that resulted in, spills or additional erosion, I don't want to speculate too much, but if there was some damage that resulted due to those activities, there could certainly be potential liability, but that wouldn't necessarily be covered in the environmental impact report or the project conditions.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, just scanning the document in a few different areas here, one of the ones that I'm finding is, for example, the replacement of trees that failed to survive within the first 5 years. So there is a tree replacement program that is part of the mitigation measure.
Probably where I got the 5-year from.
And so it talks about some that may fail to survive within those first 5 years. They will need to be replaced. And then subsequent to that, that probably triggers another 5 years of monitoring. So
Okay.
I do not see where there is a hard line that suggests that they will be done within a 2-year period beyond the completion of the project itself.
Okay. And then in terms of future liability then, that would fall to any future developer. I understand, I do think I remember reading there are certain indemnification provisions, is that correct?
Through the chair, Commissioner Van Antwerp. So the city has their own indemnification language that shows up in the project conditions of approval. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to.
It was in the conditions
But that
of
would be
approval.
to indemnify the city, right?
Okay. Okay, great. Lastly is, in terms of monitoring, is there a in the conditions of approval for Chevron, is there a way, long-term access to monitoring reports for the public? So a public transparency portal.
Through the chair, so there are various reporting requirements for some of these mitigation measures that have monitoring components. So for example, some of the habitat restoration monitoring plans have, a minimum 5-year reporting requirement on them, and with those come either quarterly or annual reports. And so as the city receives those, and as our as our environmental compliance monitor receives those, we can go ahead and post those to the project page on the city website and make them available to the public.
Okay. And that would be like in the hot topics section?
That's the easiest way to navigate to the page right now. If it continues to be a hot topic, it can continue to live there. It may be that eventually the project page will get relocated just to the Community Development Department's webpage. But in either case, we can continue to make it available and accessible to the public and let folks know where they can find those reports as they're submitted.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
One more question.
You? Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to ask one more question about mitigation monitoring. There's an awful lot of mitigation in this project, which is remarkably good, I think. How does it filter down? Does it go to the consultant who deals with all that? Does the city, who's the point person, and how does it flow?
Through the chair, maybe Luis can help me with this one as well, but the way that it would work, right, is the applicant is responsible for preparing the different plans and deliverables that are called for in the mitigation measures and submitting those either to the city and/or the other regulatory agencies who might have some oversight over that particular issue area. And then, ultimately, the city bats last in this case in terms of accepting and approving those monitoring plans and signing them off, so to speak, on the mitigation monitoring and reporting plan. That's part of what that condition is intended to do, is it creates this matrix, if you will, of all those project conditions and requirements that allows us to track and make sure every requirement has been complied with and the timelines met and the obligations met before we sign it off and allow Chevron to move on to the next step. And so that's part of why we included in the project conditions a requirement for Chevron to fund an environmental compliance monitor on behalf of the city, so that we have a point person who's taking responsibility for making sure all those boxes are checked throughout the decommissioning and remediation phases of the project.
That's perfect. I didn't see that in the report. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions. One, Chevron's comments to the DEIR, one of them was Tier 1 environment screening levels for residential uses, and they wanted that struck, and versus the standard for on-site soil remediation consistent with Chevron cleanup objectives. Does that signify a lesser degree of cleanup?
Mr. Chair, we do not believe so. Originally, Chevron had included that language, and they objected. That was part of their original application. I think that in their workings with the EPA and with the Santa Barbara County Environmental Health Services, different language was adopted for that. But I would suggest that Chevron answered that question specifically.
Right.
That probably makes the most sense.
Right, and it's common knowledge that Chevron will retain ownership once this is done. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, to the best of our knowledge,
Yeah.
that they are retaining ownership until they don't. I mean, those are private inner workings of companies that can sell land or lease land or whatever it happens to be. So we have no control over any potential future negotiation or sale of the property.
No, I just point that out because they have a stake in cleaning it up. They have a big stake in making sure that it's done right. I think it's easy to get into a versus such and such versus, and I just said that to try to alleviate that they're a huge shareholder in this future. So, and then this is probably for Chevron, but I'd like for you to explain to me how they're going to remove the pipes on the bluff at the Seal Rookery. In the staff report, it says removal offshore through top of bluff. So that's sort of interesting. And then that could be for Chevron. And then who pays for Hilda and Hazel? It's a financial responsibility because it's not Chevron, correct?
So, Mr. Chair, Chevron is the original owner of those, the Hilda and Hazel platforms that were removed in 1997. And there was the city at the time did not object to the way in which the project was conducted and approved by the State Lands Commission, who had lead agency and jurisdiction over the removal of those platforms. But Chevron is ultimately the landowner or the owner of those facilities. And as such, Chevron has come forward and has agreed as part of the review of this alternative to include that as part of their project.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you.
And just to add on to that, Commissioner Moyer, Vice Chair Moyer, there are other facilities here that are not slated for removal as part of this project. And so the intention is that the city would work with the owners of those other facilities to seek their decommissioning and removal at a later time as those facilities are no longer operable.
Yeah, it was my understanding that most of those are operable still. And like the pier, access to the platforms and the boats, that's going to go on for a while.
Right, so the pier would remain for the foreseeable future here currently, at least through the end of the existing lease with Chevron.
Yeah.
The power cables presumably are needed to continue to provide power out to the platforms until those are shut down fully. The natural gas pipeline from, is it Habitat?
Yeah, Habitat.
Into the facility, that's owned by a different company, and so we've had at least an initial sit-down with those folks and the owner of that pipeline to talk about future decommissioning of it. So, the wheels are in motion on these things, but it's slow, and they're all kind of on their own individual timelines.
Yeah. Is Habitat still producing, or is it finished?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe Habitat has produced for some time.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. We're in the public hearing process, and I'd like to hear from the Chevron rep, Wally D. Mazur. Is that right?
Good evening. Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Waleed Masri.
Masri?
Masri.
Great,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Is your green button on there?
It is. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, I can, but I wasn't sure others could.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm the director for the West Coast Decommissioning Program for Chevron. I was assigned to this position back in 2017. I moved to the area in 2018. Absolutely love living here and love the community. And so the comment that was made earlier, Mr. Chair, that we have a lot of stake in cleaning up this property, which is a fantastic piece of land in the beautiful city of Carpinteria. Thank you for the opportunity to address the commission and for facilitating this important process on behalf of Chevron. I'll be brief here. I'd like to also thank the planning commissioners, the dedicated city staff, all agencies, scientists, engineers, attorneys, consultants, and members of the community that contributed to the development of the final environmental impact report for the decommissioning of the Carpinteria, decommissioning and remediation of the Carpinteria oil and gas facilities. Chevron supports the certification of the EIR, final EIR, as proposed. And of course, there's been discussion about a few tweaks and additions as advised by the commissioners. This is a crucial step that signifies a very important milestone for the project and for our community. It will allow us to, as was discussed earlier, to obtain the additional required permits from all the different agencies and to start the decommissioning and remediation work as well as the restoration down the line. It will immediately have great visual impact to the community. I think our first work will be to remove the big tank, the big green tank, and that will have a very nice change going down Dump Road. In any case, we can answer some of these questions that were mentioned. We have a few of us here, but thank you for your support and partnership. On the cleanup standard, I think the remedial action plan will show that we're trying to clean this to high standards so it can be used for anything. We don't have plans, Chevron does not have plans to develop the site, and no foreseeable change of ownership, but things can change. As far as the question about Hazel and Hilda, who pays for that, we agreed with the city to remove those pipelines, and it's part of the project, so Chevron will pay for that. And I can't remember what other questions that were mentioned, but we can answer those as well.
I was interested in the process of removing the pipes from near the seal rookery and the bluffs, because in the staff report it says removal offshore through top of bluff.
Right. Simon, maybe I can ask you to address that question.
Thank you.
Good evening. Simon Poulter with Padre Associates. We're a local environmental consulting firm and supporting Chevron in their permitting of this project. The removal of the pipelines through the surf zone and the offshore components, and then finally the bluffs, are really broken down into three components. There will be a barge offshore that will take the pipelines out through the state waters limits. Through the beach, we will also access the beach from the areas down towards state parks and bring equipment down the beach where the pipeline will be cut. The bluff itself will be worked at from both the top of bluff as well as at the base. It'll be a short duration activity using heavy equipment. We've looked at options of actually lifting the pipeline up onto the bluff with a crane versus pulling it offshore, but the majority of the work will be done to pull the pipeline offshore to minimize the impacts associated with the work on the beach. But yes, the bluff, as you saw in our plan, we've done a bluff restoration component, a study to actually identify it. The Hazel-Hilda pipelines were originally not removed because of consultation with the city about concerns about bluff erosion. But as any of you have entered the beach during the wintertime, those pipelines periodically get exposed. So the attempt here is obviously to remediate that for future use going forward. But the bluff stability plan will be submitted to the city by a registered engineer that will have performance criteria. Those performance criteria will hold us to that standard to make sure the bluffs do not have additional erosion once the pipelines are removed. Hopefully that answered your question.
I'm concerned about the rookery, that just the amount of activity, and that's I think, a very precious element of the city of Carp.
Well, and to build on that, as part of our application, we have proposed full-time, both onshore and offshore monitoring.
Right.
Our biologists have worked historically at the rookery. We're well-versed. We're approved by National Marine Fisheries to do that kind of monitoring. So there will be full-time biological monitors on site through any activity on that area as well as throughout the site.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have questions for him?
Yeah, while Mr. Poulter is almost still at the podium, I had a couple questions. Just follow up. You mentioned the bluff stabilization and monitoring plan, and just to follow up on a previous discussion, is there a standard that you go by with regards to the duration of monitoring after the work is completed? 2 years, 5 years? Is that something that would be included in the final and approved plan, the duration?
Yeah,
post-
the intent is that the plan, the actual bluff restoration plan will include a performance standard. Bluff erosion typically is very episodic. It's usually catastrophic, at a better word, that it doesn't occur a little bit at a time and all of a sudden a bluff slumps. One of the concerns, obviously, is when we pull that pipeline out, we want to minimize the disruption to the bluff surface as a whole. Both the marine terminal, the Hazel Hilder lines, and the pipelines that go right through the rookery, each are slightly different. So obviously, we're going to need to make sure that no water is enhanced down that erosional area. So that bluff plan will include those criteria, and we have to meet those criteria before we get sign-off from the city and other agencies that may be involved. So I can't give you a direct duration, whether it's 2 or 5 years, because if we meet the criteria, then that's sign-off, so to speak. If we can't meet that criteria, then the work would continue to restore that bluff and maintain it.
So if we experience subsidence after first rainy period, then that you would come back and
Correct.
Restore that. to
Yes,
grade.
biological monitoring, when we do a restoration, typically it's 3 to 5 years based on Cal Fish and Wildlife requirements. That's what we've usually used for wetland mitigation. So again, you have to have a certain survival rate of your vegetation. Once you've met that criteria, you can actually, suggest a 5-year monitoring period, but at 3 years, if you've met that requirements, they can approve it,
Okay,
that you're done.
thanks. And then I don't know if you or one of the other project team members cared to comment on the 3-year schedule and the crew sizes, those kind of things. Is that something that you considered as part of your overall work plan and environmental impacts?
Yes, and as you know, we have historically done work on the site. The former marketing terminal, for example, when that was, those facilities were demolished and cleanup. So we've used that past experience working on the site, working with the team. So obviously, one of the things we have to do once we take down the surface facilities, we need to get in and actually do some additional assessment to make sure that we understand any additional contamination under those facilities. We have limitations. We don't want to be doing large excavations in the wintertime when we're getting water into those excavations. We also have Native American monitoring requirements. We have developed a tribal plan which outlines how many monitors we're going to have on site. So the timing, I think, as Luis said, has been designed to address what we think is a worst-case scenario. But between bird nesting season, harbor seal season, I think the plan is designed to kind of maximize the work windows that are available while minimizing the total impact to the community.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, now, next speaker is Dustin Hoseth. Is that correct? I don't.
Close enough. It's Hoyseth.
Hoseth.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Dustin Hoyseth. I'm the Director of Public Policy with the Santa Barbara South Coast Chamber of Commerce, which represents businesses from Goleta to Carpinteria. I'm here today to voice the Chamber's support for the decommissioning project, not necessarily to weigh in on the details of the project, but to speak to the commitment of the Chevron team based on my experience working with them as a regional community organization. As a chamber, we've had the opportunity to witness firsthand Chevron's long-standing role as a trusted and engaged community partner in Carpinteria and throughout the region. And throughout the decommissioning program, Chevron has consistently demonstrated a commitment to transparency environmental responsibility, and meaningful community engagement. My role often puts me in the position of community convener, helping to get the word out on various issues and topics throughout the South Coast. And I've been consistently impressed by Chevron's efforts and commitment throughout the years to educate the public about this project through presentations to our committee and our members, or to our committees and members. Additionally, Chevron has supported numerous local nonprofits, contributed to community improvement initiatives, and has consistently shown up. Whether that's through hands-on involvement, sponsorships, or direct partnerships with organizations that serve our youth, our arts, our economy, and local families in need, Chevron has demonstrated a genuine investment in the well-being and vitality of this community. The next phase of this project is a significant undertaking and a milestone for the community. Chevron is uniquely positioned to carry out this work responsibly, safely, and with the same high standards that we believe they've demonstrated throughout. We appreciate the thorough work of staff and the commission in reviewing this project and support moving forward today. Thank you for your time and service to the community.
Thank you. Next speaker is Michelle Baker. Oh, is it Michelle? It's Michael. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
all right.
I'm gonna
It'll be the
put-
first time I've been called
I'm
Michelle.
going to butcher every one of these names.
It's all right. My name is Michael Baker. I have the honor of being the CEO for United Boys and Girls Club Santa Barbara County. And we actually have a facility here in Carpinteria. And I wanted to speak very highly about Chevron and the significance and impact they've had on our organization. Not just only us, I'm speaking on behalf of Boys and Girls Clubs, but I know they've impacted, as Dustin mentioned, many nonprofit organizations. I can tell you firsthand that if it wasn't for Chevron and their support, financial and volunteer support, we wouldn't have been able to reopen in July of 2020 during the COVID pandemic, this Carpinteria Club. They gave us seed money to help us serve the youth in this community. A lot of folks weren't able to step up and support. Financial times were very challenging. If you can turn the clock back to July of 2020, very uncertain times. Chevron gave us the seed money that allowed us to reopen the Carpinteria Club and serve the youth here in Carpinteria. More important than the financial support, what I want to emphasize that's more meaningful to me in my world and my role as a CEO is that Chevron, not only a great corporate citizen, but they encourage their leadership to serve on nonprofit boards. That kind of knowledge, institutional knowledge and experience is invaluable to someone like me. I'm trained to work with youth. But when we're making strategic decisions moving forward, having someone like Mark Corte Nahabedian on our board, giving us his knowledge and expertise, as I said, is invaluable. And they've been tremendous supporters from day one, even before Mark serving on our board. His predecessor was on our board for 3 years as well, Sarah Dearman. And they've been extremely involved on all levels. So just wanted to share that with you. And thank you for your continued service, and we support whatever we can do to help Chevron in the commissioning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Susan Allen.
Good evening. While we all applaud the decommissioning of the Chevron plant, we need to be mindful of the impacts to the community. Traffic, noise, impacts to the seals and recreational areas must be protected. Over and over in the documents, the term temporary or short-term is used. Those terms need to be defined so we know how our community will be impacted. While I have many concerns about the decommissioning, our harbor seals are a huge concern. Please note it is both a rookery for part of the year and a haul-out 365 days of the year. Please refer to the area as the Carpinteria Harbor Seal Haul-Out and Rookery. From my experience, having at least two monitors is needed. It's a lot to expect of one person to observe all that is going on and communicate effectively over several hours. From the pier, it's not easy to communicate with workers below. You can best observe the seals overall from the bluff. On the beach, you cannot observe all of the seals, particularly offshore. Seal Watch has a long history of observing behavior and should be consulted before and during work. It is important to understand our seals use the sanctuary base 365 days a year. Harbor seals need to rest on land about half of the time. When work is occurring on the beach or any disturbances occur, the harbor seals flee to the ocean, but will return after time when they feel safe, since they need to rest. So while it is good to start work when there are no seals on the beach, it should be understood this is only because there's already been a disturbance causing them to leave. And that being on the beach working, a disturbance is ongoing since the seals cannot engage in their natural behavior of resting on the beach. The overall seal count during the summer and fall tends to be lower only because of a greater number of disturbances. Some of the highest counts in Carpinteria have been during the summer and fall. And for example, on October 1st, some years ago, a high count of 365 seals. Also, please note Seal Watch has documented disturbances to the seals on loud operations north of the railroad. This should be monitored and addressed if necessary. I am concerned about the potential recreational impacts to people walking in Tarpitz Park, Jump Road, and other trails. I understand the impact are temporary, but neither temporary or short-term have been quantified. We really have no idea how often Jump Road, the trails through Tarpitz, and other trails may be closed. Generally, it's easy to avoid trucks on the shoulders of Jump Road, and I would hope some mechanism is employed to assure that people are not stopped except in extreme circumstances of very heavy or wide traffic. Can we get some explanation from Chevron on the circumstances when closure may be needed and on the number of times this may occur? There is some ambiguity in the mitigation measures for the harbor seals. On page 4.361, the mitigation measures are clearly stated to apply during the summer and fall months, but on the following page, perhaps it's a copy of standard measures. The timing is stated as applying winter, spring. 4.11.4.1, project trip generation. Please help me understand the math. How does 5,445 truckloads translate into a total of 303 trips distributed over a 3-year project? Legacy oil wells will not be removed, but will the cathodic wells be removed? Please confirm that all pipelines in the bundle on the beach and the stub to the east will be removed. And a note to the general public, decommissioning does not mean that the site is cleaned up and ready for its next iteration. There are many other items that need to be taken care of, and this process will be ongoing for a number of years. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Susan Malu.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Yeah, they don't expect anyone to be able to do that. So, good evening. I am Susan Mayhew. I study the harbor seals as a semi-retired veterinarian and wildlife manager. I would like to let you know that I just returned from a visit with harbor seal experts at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito. It's one of the largest rescue, rehabilitation, and research centers in the world. These experts agree that the stresses placed on harbor seals specifically as a unique category of pinnipeds resulting from climate change has compromised this species in Carpinteria. Our Carpinteria harbor seal rookery cannot withstand more pressure from the fossil fuel industry. And the proposed activities include disturbances that will likely result in the demise of this colony. The final EIR does not understand or allow for the harbor seal normal behavior. With all due respect to Padre, who has a good team of biologists in other areas, I have to say they do not understand harbor seals. Their draft EIR did a pretty poor job of describing the nature and behavior of harbor seals. And the experts I was consulting with agree that not even NOAA truly understands harbor seals. They're a very particular species, and we are blessed with their presence here in Carpinteria. I'm speaking out for the harbor seals of Carpinteria, whose existence hangs in the balance because of Chevron and fossil fuel activities. And yet the decommissioning proposes to release more carbon emissions, as Susan Allen pointed out, all the truckloads, all of the work that is going to be done. And much of that is to achieve a Tier 1 level of remediation of the onshore sites. If Chevron doesn't have plans for what's going to go in there, it does not necessitate that much. It should not necessitate that much hauling out. The plan designates a team of monitors. Can your team describe harbor seal groupings as an anti-predator strategy? Can your team identify flight readiness formation? Would your team record what percentage of seals are ready to flee and then place a stop work order at that point? And if your team is not familiar with those behaviors, you will not catch disturbances in time to greatly harm the harbor seal's existence. I ask that, in addition to what you must do for decommissioning, please take in reparation for the damage done and obtain the onshore and offshore area that is harbor seal habitat for a marine protected area to protect that area in perpetuity. This final EIR is not complete. It is not sufficient to protect harbor seals. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next person, Randy.
Moon? Randy Moon? Is that right?
Hi, my name is Randall Moon, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the harbor seals since they don't have too many voices in this room. For over 100 years, there's been harbor seal rookery, and people have visited this for just about as long of a period of time. There's thousands of people who go through and observe the seals from up on the bluffs. And after years and years of that, they've raised millions of dollars in funding for the city. But money shouldn't dictate everything. And so it's important to think that that even though millions of dollars are brought in, one thing that has to be considered is to ask if the city has prepared for a loss of income when this seal rookery ends up collapsing from the work that's proposed. So the city will lose a source of funds. My concern about the EIR is that it doesn't go far enough. It's incomplete in a number of ways. So, for example, ignorance of habitat. The EIR doesn't recognize that anywhere that the seals are required to spend half their time on land and half of it in the water. That's made by their physiological demands of where they eat and where they sleep and where they do other physiological processes. And nowhere does this show up in the EIR. And so it seems that if you don't even know where the seals are living, that they're in both the beach and in the water, if you don't know where they're living, then it's going to be hard to protect them. Another aspect of harbor seal biology is called site fidelity. Harbor seals are different from sea lions in that harbor seals live in one place year-round. There is no season. They live there year-round, and they live within just a few miles of where they were born. So that's the site fidelity. And so if you try to take harbor seals out and put them in a new location so that you can continue your work in that area, they'll just come back, if at all. But you can't relocate them. You can't capture them and relocate them. So basically, it boils down to you can have either seals or people. And I can understand that Chevron has the best of intentions and wants to remove the pipes that go through the rookery. But the simple fact is that would basically destroy the rookery. You can't always undo something that's been done, no matter how much you might wish it so. And so the only thing that we can do that'll allow the hundreds of seals that live there, the only thing that we can do that'll allow them to continue is to leave them alone, cap the piping, and just stay away from them. They're very adept at recognizing people's odor and smell and sights and dogs from hundreds of feet away. And if they so much as see a twitch of a person, they will all flush into the water. And many people will say, well, they don't see any seals there, no matter how often they come. But the truth is, a single dog or a single person walking by the bluffs and waving their arms or making sounds or walking on the beach can lead to all the seals flushing, and they don't come back for days. And so we've studied this ad nauseum, and it's quite clear that the seals have a well-developed system for detecting intruders, and they use that to drive away from the threat, and ultimately they will reestablish a base of where to work, where to live. But sorry, Parkinson's is a real bitch. So anyhow, let me conclude by just saying that the rookery is in danger of vanishing due to human intervention and activities. And it was curious that harbor seals are barely mentioned in the entire EIR. And so that makes me think that people are hoping that the issue of harbor seals will go away, but it won't. It's really a binary choice between doing the right thing and just leaving the seals alone on their 1,500 feet of beach, or else going ahead and tearing it apart in the hope of fixing it. But I'd like to ask that you please consider the fact that harbor seals are a very unique species and a unique presence in the city, and we're the better off for it. And so there are many people here who wish to protect them and help them survive. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next person is Frank Arredondo.
I'm sorry if I can. I'm asking if this letter could be added to the record, whether you guys get to read it now, but at least add it. It's going to be the comments that I'm saying here today. But there's also a great photo on page 2 I wish you to look at. So my name is Frank Arredondo. I'm a Chumash lineal descendant. What does that mean? It means that my ancestry goes back to the time of contact when the Spanish were here. I can trace back to the villages that my ancestors are from, the village of Tipu and Shalawa. I'm listed on the Native American Heritage Commission's most likely descendants list as a member of an MLD within the Chumash territory. I'm a member of a handful of people that are designated with the disposition of human remains when they come up. I know that law pretty much inside and out. But being a member of that list, it's a huge responsibility for me. And when I was put on that list, way back in 2006, I started to decide that I was going to look out for my ancestors by protecting them from development projects. So I went to school to get a master's in anthropology, archaeology. I don't work as an archaeologist, but I do review archaeological reports. I know how they think. I know how things work. I know how the policies are. I review development projects such as these to make sure that we're adhering to all the laws and policies and regulations that are allowed. Make sure things are not mixed up. I've been doing that since 2006. I've worked with all of the various tribes that are in the area. After school, I went on to manage cultural resource management crews, and first started with the Refugio oil spill. We had to deal with Haswapper cleanup. We had a 12-hour Haswapper training. It was no big deal. Then on to Ventura oil spill, had to do cleanup there too. Thomas Fire, Thomas Fire and Woolsey Fire. Each one of those were 8 months, 6 months on one and 8 months on the other. 4 years consecutively working my butt off in all those fields as the project lead and manager, dealing with cultural resources in hazardous waste material. I've also worked on this project doing the site assessment and the soil testing since 2018, since like forever I've been there. I think, 700 auger holes? It's enough to kill you. But I know where everything is. And fortunately, my understanding is that tribal leadership was consulted in the creation of the Cultural Resource Management Plan. People who have not worked in this industry under these specific conditions. I know one person that came on during Woolsey that was there, but that's one. I wish I would have been brought in. I'm not leadership according to them. But however, I did start my own little group, Kesenskumu Chumash, and I did submit a request for consultation, but apparently that has been concluded. And I don't know what that means under AB 52, but that's another discussion. I am in support of this cleanup project. I am. I want it to go forward. I think it's a great idea. However, there are things that are in this environmental impact report that lines are a little blurred. They're a little off. There's some changes that need to be made just to make it flow correctly. I will say that one of the items on page 2 of that document I sent refers to the California airport, or Carpinteria airport, sorry. There's no mention of it. It was here. Like, this is, the warehouse is right there. This is where the parking lot was. The runway was right through there, the MTSC Center driveway. When we did our core samples, the road was so hard because it was so compacted. But that image shows you that this was part of the airport. At least some honorable mention. It wasn't there for many years, but at least, history. So that would be nice. I'm specifically talking about the archaeological resources now. Title 14, Section 151126.4 talks about mitigation measures. What is a mitigation measure? It falls into 2 categories, either preservance, preservation or recovery. When you preserve, you do that by either avoiding the site, you incorporate parks or green space, or you cap it with a layer of soil, or you deed it into a conservation easement, right? Because this is an oil cleanup site, hazardous waste, there's not much preservation that's going to take place because anything you find is going to be contaminated. This leaves recovery. Under CEQA, the only items that are recovered are things that are significant, that meet the criteria of significance. If it is significant, it goes to get studied in a repository. What if it doesn't? There are things under tribal cultural resources that are super significant, but they're not required to go to a repository. What happens to those? So there's kind of a little hole in that one. When we did the soil remediation programs, we had a process for dealing with those. So we go and look at the mitigation resources with that in mind as to preservation or recovery, and you look at all of the items that are listed there. Colt 1A talks about creating a conservation management plan. Well, that's not preservation. That's the process of addressing personnel and monitoring. 1B, it's not a mitigation measure. Oh, cultural resource 1E, data recovery. That is a mitigation measure. So you got one for that. 1F is sending it to a repository, not a mitigation measure. 2A, not mitigation, but rather a best management practice to identifying a resource. That's where you have a monitor and whatnot. 2B, it's a law. That 2B has to do with the discovery of human remains. Under Public Resource Code 5097.98 is a law that when you find human remains, you step out of CEQA and you do all of these steps. It's a law. To cite it as a mitigation measure, you're citing a law as a mitigation measure. I think that's kind of, you're not supposed to do that. That's a breaking of the law violation. This is important because under CEQA, mitigation measures that are being imposed upon a client have a financial limitation. It's something like 1 or 1.5% of whatever the total cost project. Human remains are not part of CEQA. There's no cost associated with it. So you can't call it a mitigation because now you're going to set up the applicant under the presumption that it's covered by that financial cost limitation. So boom, that gets tossed out. And I know people have discovered that where they've had applicants who contested the amount of money to deal with human burials. Yeah, it's not covered under CEQA. So out of all that, one is a true mitigation measure. The rest are best management practices and personnel practices. A monitor acts as a liaison to all the parties. They know the knowledge of all the related laws, the conditions of approval. They know when something is supposed to go this way or that way, and be able to notify all the relative parties involved. They're professionally qualified to identify a resource, the difference between a cobble or a mono. And in this case, you need something that talks about the hot zone. They should have 40-hour HAZWOPER training, certified, as well as the applicant should be able to provide the monitors with proper PPE if it's needed. When we first started doing the soil testing, we had to have fire-affected clothing, FR clothing, as well as there was talk about whether or not we needed respirators. Those are things that are needed if you're going to be doing this kind of soil disturbance. The particles will bust up into the air. You're going to get that stuff on you, and the question is, are you going to be impacted by that by hazardly? Why? It shouldn't fall upon the monitor to
Maybe you can condense it a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You've gone on way too long.
Thank you so much. I was surprised, too. I'm almost done. So, yeah, that should be included. There's an exclusion zone that is referred. That's HAZWOPER terminology. That shouldn't be used. And let's see, I already did that. Going forward, the CRMP is going to be edited and be in line with this project. My ask, and I've asked Nick over there, include me in that. I have valuable knowledge to make that a better project or better outline. With my experience in all these other hazardous waste things, there's good stuff that can be done. Tree removal and 10 feet below surface all should be monitored. 10 feet below surface of soil disturbance should all be monitored. And lastly, I pray for a conservation easement to be added so those items that are not significant get reburied on someplace on this property so it stays with the land. And it's attached to the deed of the title deed so that in perpetuity is never to be disturbed. That means that if Chevron sells the property, the next owner will know, well, we can't touch that spot.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's all I have today. Thank you.
The next speaker is Whit Hollis.
Good evening. I just have a very quick comment or two comments on a very complex project that people have been working on for a very long time. In a former life, I had experience dealing with offshore and or coastal decommissioning and hazardous material cleanup. The fact that this program is going to residential cleanup standard is very prudent and preserves options for future planning for the property, which is very important for the city. And two, for whatever it's worth, my experience with Chevron is they all do what they say. They're honorable. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's, do we have anybody else that wants to address the commission? No? So, bring. Oh,
Okay, Patrick O'Connor, I'm going to unmute your microphone so you can make your public comment. You should be good to go. All right.
This is Patrick O'Connor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think you can hear me now. Appreciate it. I'm speaking as a resident of District 5 in Carpinteria. And just a couple of thoughts. The report speaks to the groundwater risk as being fairly low. I can appreciate that in a normal course. And I'm just curious how that gets affected in the event of a release and how the stormwater mitigation plan would affect groundwater quality out of the ordinary course. Second question has to do with project management. It was interesting to hear that there was a similar project on the property where lessons learned are going to be drawn from, which is fantastic. My question from a project management standpoint is, are the people that were associated with that work on the site previously going to be involved in this project physically? And to what extent is the overall project work, and particularly the critical phases of work, contracted or in-house to Chevron? And those are my questions. Thanks. Have a good evening.
thank you.
All right, we have another speaker, Rita Salm. You can go ahead and start talking if you unmute your mic.
All right, I'm a Carpinteria resident. I want to thank Chevron for all their years of work on this project. We're all looking forward to the decommissioning. I have a few concerns. One, accidental spills, which is a class 1 impact. Two, if you could please tell us the number of daily vehicle trips. Someplace in the report, I can't remember where, they listed 62. I want to know if it is 62 vehicle trips or however many it is, how long is that going to be going on? Is that going to, when is it going to begin? How many days, months, or years? If you could be more specific about that. There needs to be a safe passage for people who use Dump Road to get to the Seal Rookery, the beach, or the bluffs. Disturbances to the residential neighborhood, noise, pollution, road damage. And I'd like you to describe what the most stringent cleanup means. I also am concerned, as many others are, with the disturbance to the seals. And when does Chevron anticipate that this project will begin after permits? And when will the pipes be removed? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we got one more. Molly Troop, you should be allowed to talk.
Hi there. My name is Gavin McDonald. I'm speaking on behalf of my partner, Molly Troop, who's actually putting our 1.5-year-old son to bed right now. But Molly is the Science and Program Manager at Santa Barbara Channel Keeper. Their mission is to protect and restore the Santa Barbara Channel and its watersheds. Channel Keeper is in support of decommissioning and removal of the Chevron Carpinteria oil and gas processing facility project. However, they're concerned that activities required for the decommissioning of this facility will remain significant despite the proposed mitigation measures. We know from the data collected by the Carpinteria Seal Watch that the number of adults using the rookery and haul out in Carpinteria has been declining since 2004. This decline is of such concern that the ad hoc Harbor Seal Advisory Committee was created several years ago and has voted to recommend expanding the beach closure from 6 months to year-round for 3 years. In February, the City Council unanimously approved directing staff to investigate the cost and consultant needs of pursuing a CDP from the Coastal Commission for the recommended 3-year beach closure. The 3-year beach closure aims to protect the seal haulout and rookery from disturbances that would be far smaller than the decommissioning activities, though significant enough to warrant the exploration of increased protections for the harbor seals. Comment letters from harbor seal experts, particularly those who are involved in the Carpinteria Seal Watch program, have provided lengthy and detailed comments about the DEIR and FEIR's deficiencies in the harbor seal mitigation measures outlined in these reports. We urge that the mitigation measures in the FEIR be further developed and refined with input from the Harbor Seal Advisory Committee before final approval. Thank you very much for your consideration of these comments.
Thank you.
And that is all public comments today, Chair.
Okay, so now we'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation and
Does staff want to answer any of these questions?
yeah. Okay. Does the staff want to answer any of the questions that have been?
Chair Moore, could we request a few-minute break just so we can coordinate on making sure that we're addressing the
Yeah,
comments
that's
that we
fine.
received and can put together some responses for you?
Yeah, that was 10 minutes.
10 minutes sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
welcome back. Now we're going to have some answers from our staff.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we are going to try to respond to some of the more salient issues that came up during the various public comments. In addition, I believe Chevron might want to respond to some of the comments, since some of those were specifically addressed to them, to the applicant. And also, if you feel like there are some things that were touched on that we're not touching on as we provide our summary, there was quite a few things there. So if you haven't heard something that you're interested in, please let us know, and we'll try to address that also. Obviously, there were quite a bit of comment regarding the harbor seals, and I think we should let you know again that there were a number of marine biologists that were involved, not only from Padre, but also from MRS Environmental, looking at all the issues that came up as part of the potential impacts to the seals. There is also, it's also important to point out that although there is, in some cases, limited discussion about the harbor seals within the environmental document, within the body of the final EIR, there is quite a bit of information there, and then there is quite a bit of mitigation in the harbor seal program. But also, there is Appendix C6, which has quite a bit more information, more detailed information as to how the seals will be handled, and that is part of the information that is available to the public. Some of the things that are included there echo some of the comments that were heard tonight and that we have heard in the past. There is, for example, a requirement for Carpinteria seal watch coordination. And in the plan, it says that given their extensive database of information regarding the local harbor seal population in this area, the Carpinteria Seal Watch organization will be notified and consulted with prior to any of the work activities commencing. I'm just giving you some of the flavor of some of the things that are included there that are attempting to address some of the concerns that were stated tonight. There was also some comment about the number of truck trips and the maximum number of round trips per day would be 62 vehicle trips per day. So that is, there will be some variation. Some days there will be fewer trips, but the maximum number that was analyzed was 62 trips. There was also some comment about the truckloads and how the numbers did not add up. And we have an estimated total of 5,445 truckloads, which is actually tons of material that will be produced. And if you take those 5,445 tons of material and you divide that at 18 tons per truck trip, you end up with the 303 truck trips that is stated in the document. So the math does add up, contrary to the comment. There was also some comment about AB 52 consultation. And to be clear, the requirements of AB 52 consultation are very specific. And one of the things that is required is that the tribal members that want to be consulted anytime that there is a project are required to submit a notification or a request for notification to the city. The city then, in this particular case, issued letters to all of those tribal members that had requested notification per the requirements of AB 52. So letters went out to all the Native American groups that had put in the request, and they were asked if they wanted to participate in the formal AB 52 process. Out of that, only one tribal group requested that type of consultation, and the city proceeded to conduct that consultation. That consultation has now been concluded because the city came to an agreement with the tribal group that there will be a cultural resources management plan that would address their concerns, and the details of that cultural resources management program are part of the mitigation measure and the conditions of approval. Now, that doesn't negate the opportunity to consult with others outside of the AB 52 process. And Chevron has been actively participating not only with the tribal group that participated in the formal AB 52 process, but also with all other tribal groups that have been interested in working with Chevron. That effort will continue to go on, and the city will participate in that because the city will eventually review that plan, and we welcome any additional information that is provided to us as part of that process. So hopefully that helps address a little bit of the concern there. There was some question about the cleanup levels, and I think Chevron responded to that. The cleanup levels are the highest for the highest possible use, which would be a residential use. So the site is going to be cleaned up so that it can be as high as a residential use in the future. So if there were any doubts about that, I think that should clarify it. There was some question about safety for access through Dump Road for members of the public. And there is a transportation plan that is required of Chevron and to address the potential safety issues that might occur as a result of the potential use by members of the public to be using Dump Road as trucks are coming in and out, which could be potentially hazardous. Those are big trucks. And so Chevron is required to provide some plan to address that, whether it's a designated path that separates the trucks from potential pedestrians and so on. That will be addressed as part of that plan. I believe those are the ones I have. There were some other comments, but I'm not sure if the city attorney wants to address.
Sure, through the chair, just one other comment, and Nick can also chime in, is there was comments on potential recreation impacts. Those are going to be addressed in condition 47, discusses maintenance of access. Sorry, let me see, where's that? So there will be provided a detailed traffic management plan that'll go into more detail, including requiring plans for providing access to business, coastal development or coastal dependent uses, and recreational uses during construction. And so that'll go into more detail about what potential closures there might be that would impact access, et cetera.
And then likewise, it also gets picked up through the engineering permit for some of the excavation and grading work, including any earthwork there through Tar Pits Park for removal of the pipelines or across the public trail easements, so that we can coordinate when those closures occur, try to facilitate detours where possible, think about how we stage equipment and work to try to have a minimal impact on the public's use of Tar Pits Park and the trails through the area. There may be some brief closures when work has to occur within a trail route, but the intention is to try to minimize that as much as possible.
And then Chevron wanted to speak.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I will try to take the easy questions and try to answer those. I do want to provide a clarification on, there are a lot of concerns about oil spills. The site, the equipment in the site are pretty much free of any hydrocarbons. What you may find is maybe some traces. Since we reassumed responsibility for the site back in 2018, we spent a lot of resources, a lot of time between 2018 and we finished in 2023, cleaning up, removing all free hydrocarbons from the equipment, from the tank, from the piping, above ground, below ground, and flushing all these lines, cleaning the tanks and all the inside of the equipment. So if there's any loss of containment, again, it'd be more like a trace, not an oil spill. And I'm sure that we have great mitigation plans to address any potential release to the soil, and immediately we clean that up. The other question that was asked online was regarding the lessons learned and the personnel that were involved in that work for this site previously. And we have the same personnel that have worked the site in the past. Our site manager, Kevin Dugan, who's here, will also be involved in this. And our project manager, his name is Chris Penza, he's not here, he's on vacation, but he continues to be involved in this project.
Thanks, Wally. Just want to clarify and build upon what Luis has identified and Nick as far as some of the mitigation measures. The cultural resource management plan that was referenced to building through the mitigation, Chevron has been involved in an ongoing communications with the tribal groups, and there are multiple groups involved in that. That process has resulted in a draft plan that will eventually be submitted to the city. That includes training of monitors, includes hazardous material training, HAZWOPER training, provisions of the appropriate safety equipment. So a lot of that concern is addressed in the EIR mitigation, but the fact is that the plan itself is the implementation tool that the city will have a right to review and approve. So that will provide the kind of reassurances that I think a lot of the concerns that were raised this evening. Also, I just wanted to briefly touch on the fact that groundwater at this site is perched and it is heavily impacted by the natural seepage, so it's not potable. So we will not be, I would actually say that we're probably going to clean it up a little bit more than it is currently, just because the excavations that we're going to be doing is going to remove some of that natural seepage as part of the activity. So that will not be a concern, I think, in as was raised in one question. And regarding cleanup targets, one of the things that was alluded to by Luis in his comments, we are actively working with the U.S. EPA and the county health department. EPA has responsibility for the PCB cleanup. The county has responsibility for the non-PCB, mainly hydrocarbons, heavy metals, and pesticides. And those plans will be reviewed and approved by both those agencies, and then subsequently made available to the city, because that will be the standard that we're cleaning up to. So there will be ongoing interaction with the city, but also the agencies with the technical expertise to review and approve those plans and give the city reassurances that we're meeting the cleanup objectives that are established by those plans. So I think there's a lot of good checks and balances that have been developed. The harbor seal plan that was part of our original application, the 2001 documentation, which is part of the attachments to the EIR, that again has been developed based on our past experience working there on the rookery. And I think we recognize the concerns that people have raised about the rookery. We are really looking at minimizing the time that we will be on the beach during the removal of the Gale Grace pipelines. But note that the marine terminal and the Hazel Hilda lines are actually outside of the 1,000-foot closure zone in there. But certainly the people that are involved in the implementation of that plan have many years of experience with working around that rookery, and we do recognize the importance not only from the biological component, but to the community. So I believe that answered the majority of the questions, but if there's any more, I'm certainly available. Thank you.
Glenn? I will come back to the commission for deliberation and comment. Who'd like to start? Okay.
Not sure what I'm going to say. Certainly have read all this amazing material. And of course, from a land use point of view, this is absolutely great. You know, I can't see a problem, only a benefit for our city. And that is my purpose here, not to figure out all the ins and outs, the legalities, the mitigation. Is this best for our city? And yes, I'm unequivocally, yes, it is. Now, the big issue is the harbor seals. And frankly, somebody has to make a decision, and my decision is that we should approve this document. But I would suggest to you all who take great umbrance with that is to appeal to the city council, because this is a more political issue than it is a land use issue, in my opinion. I know that Los Angeles International Airport, which I know I bore you because I used to work on that EIR, but because of blue butterflies in the El Segundo Dunes, those runways are not long enough. And it was a political will that made that happen. Also, there's fairy shrimp. I don't know if you know what those are, but we had to move tons of those for the runway. I'm just saying that citizens can prevail in these matters, but at this point in time, having read it all, I think this is a good plan. There's enough mitigation to keep people working for decades. And I would say I would certify the EIR and approve the project. Thank you.
Thanks. Would you like to go?
You can't do that.
I see this as a once-in-a-generation chance for us to guide this transition of this coastal site in a way that reflects who we are as a community. I do support certifying the EIR. I think Jane is correct in her summary of the work and the due diligence that the city and all of the appropriate agencies, of which there are many, have conducted. And I believe that, you know, at the end of the day, some of the political undercurrents on some of the issues that should be directed to City Council. You know, it isn't just about removing infrastructure. It's about restoring trust. This has been going on for decades, and it's a huge parcel of just prime land that we share. So I support this, but I, at the same time, am really looking for the long-term environmental care to remain central. Not just for today's decision, but for whatever comes next.
Thanks. Okay, a few comments. I guess I'll start with the comment that the project, the decommissioning and restoration project proposed by Chevron, I believe is a good project. I believe it meets the objectives of what Chevron's intent is, and I also believe that it meets the objectives of the city in terms of moving this site in, not completely, but towards a state where it could potentially be used for some other use in the future, you know, at the time that Chevron decides they no longer need it for their use. So, you know, as has been noted, this this has been a topic of conversation and various actions by the community and the city for many, many years. I appreciate Chevron's willingness to engage at this time with the decommissioning and cleanup. I know we had a comment that the cleanup levels are too stringent, and a less stringent cleanup might have fewer impacts, and that can be true. But I think that it's in the city's best interest that we encourage and require a cleanup to the stringent standard that's proposed by Chevron. I appreciate that, and I think it's appropriate for the site, and the impacts that will be incurred are, as noted in the EIR, are short term. And I know others struggle with the short term concept of impacts, but in my opinion, the scope of the project, the schedule, the details around the type of equipment, personnel, and the various air quality and other impacts associated with that. All of that information is very thoroughly described and defined in the environmental documents, and so I'm good with that. I also want to say that the final EIR. We reviewed the draft EIR several years ago. It's been out for quite some time, and we did receive a lot of good comments on that, and many of those staff has addressed and made adjustments to the environmental document to address that input from agencies and the community. So I think I'm comfortable with a couple exceptions here that I'll mention with all of that in the final EIR. A lot of focus in the comments around protection of the harbor seals, not just during the 6-month window with pupping season, but also haul out season, which is continuous as I understand it. So I'll come back to this, but I think there's a clarification is appropriate with that regard. So I guess to work towards wrapping up my comments, I support the project as proposed. I have reviewed thoroughly the environmental document as well as the appendices, and we have a lot of questions with regards to details around the various mitigations, and if you review the appendices, you'll find that there's a significant level of detail contained in many of those documents that are relevant to some of the questions that have been asked by the public and others. So in my opinion, it's very thorough and certainly adequate under CEQA. So I'm prepared to certify that document as part of our effort tonight. There's a couple comments I had questions on earlier that I'd like to throw out. Well, one other comment. I think the selected environmentally superior alternative is appropriate. I support that alternative. I think it's good foresight on the part of the city, and appreciate the project applicant's cooperation in trying to deal with these legacy assets that are there, deal with them now, and so that they don't persist into the future and have to be dealt with by the city or others in the future. And I recognize that does create some additional impacts to work, to remove some of those pipelines. And I believe that discussion in the environmental document and the way that work is set up is done well and appropriately. And I have every confidence that the work will be properly monitored and that there's plenty of mitigation measures and supporting monitoring programs to ensure that we're doing what we can to minimize impacts from that work, including impacts to the seal haul out and rookery, harbor seal haul out and rookery. So, proposed project, the environmental documents, and the selected preferred environmentally superior alternative, I'm in support of. I don't have any problem making the overriding considerations for the Class 1 impacts. Clearly, a project like this is a benefit, environmental benefit to the community, and it does have impacts, but I believe they're well mitigated and certainly justifies overriding considerations for the project, I believe. And so with that, I guess there's a couple things I want to circle back to if I could. I do believe that some additional clarity would be helpful on condition 10 of our coastal development permit, and that corresponds to mitigation measure bio 1G, I believe. And the clarification really is, and I think from what I hear, it's the intent is that the monitoring of activities, monitoring of the seal, harbor seal, rookery, and haul out will occur for the duration of the project, during and outside of the 6-month window, and when activities are occurring within the 1,000-foot threshold. So I'd like to make sure that is adjusted to make that clear, if that's possible. So I'll pause, and it looks like, Nick, you have a comment on that?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair, Commissioner Lefevers, I'd propose that we could address that concern by simply just changing the language under the plan requirements and timing section at the end of condition 10. So right now it says, that's the part that was creating the confusion. Right now it says the monitoring plan shall be approved by the city prior to issuance of permits and implemented during periods when the haul out / rookery is active, and in parentheses, December 1 through May 31. So I would propose that we instead revise that to just say implemented during implemented during all project-related activities within 1,000 feet of the haul-out / rookery, which reflects the language at the beginning of the mitigation measure. So it'd be consistent. It would cover all activities within that 1,000-foot radius, regardless of timing.
Thank you. That's acceptable to me, I believe. Okay, appreciate that. And then the other clarification I think would be helpful is around the making sure we have a solid link between our action with regards to this coast development permit and all of the other permitting actions that may be required. And I think you had suggested perhaps condition 40 could be adjusted to address that.
Through the chair, Commissioner Lefevers, that's correct. I'm thinking we can simply add another bullet to the bulleted items there that the mitigation monitoring and reporting plan can or should include, to include a reference to, applicant shall submit all regulatory agency permits and approvals to the city for review prior to commencing work, something to that effect.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate that. Hopefully those changes are acceptable to other commissioners. Happy to hear, if they're not. And then I think there was one other, and perhaps this is something you've already adjusted, Luis, I believe you mentioned a typo that needed to be corrected in one of the impact tables that inaccurately identified a Class 1 impact or something. I want to make sure we correct that if that's needs correcting.
Yeah, through the chair, and as part of the recommendation that you see up on the slide, we have included as amended, and those are amendments to Table 5.2 and Executive Summary .3, which is the same table. It's just the Executive Summary includes that table within it, with the changes as I presented in the slide comparing the impacts.
Great, thank you. I guess I'm hesitant to hand over the mic. It's such a significant project. I don't want to stop, but I believe that reflects the meat of my thoughts and content. I'm happy to discuss anything else further, and am prepared to make a motion if there's whenever it's appropriate.
I gotta have my turn. I'm amazed at the amount of work this document really exemplifies, and you guys, you've all done a really spectacular job hanging with it, and I think, you know, there's still a long list of approvals that have to be made, and this process will keep going on for a while longer. I wouldn't doubt that it gets appealed, and maybe that's good too. I don't have an opinion about that. The things that Glenn brought up, I agree with, and you know, it's a huge project, and it's got to have a little pain in it. There's no way around that. But ultimately, I think it's a huge benefit for all of the people that are going to grow up here in this town. And just one little side note. When I was a worm oil field welder, working for BNC Welding, you know, I was 24. They gave me a truck and sent me. I just worked there for an hour. They gave me a truck and sent me down Dump Road to weld a nipple on the bottom of a tank, and they had it propped up, and I couldn't weld overhead. So I was under there. Finally they said, "Now you go on back. We need somebody else." So and that was my introduction to Chevron Oil. So anyway, and it's been a great meeting. Thank you.
Sure, if we're ready for a motion, I move that we adopt Resolution PC 25-001, approving the development plan and coastal development permit, 21-2128, for the Chevron Carpinteria Oil and Gas Facility Decommissioning Project, including the revised revisions noted on the board, and revisions to Condition 40 and Condition 10 that we discussed earlier. And that, you know, that includes certification of the environmental document, the proposed development plan with the Hilda Hazel pipeline removal alternative as the selected environmentally superior alternative. And I think that's it.
I'll second that.
Do you want a roll call?
We could do that if the commission's ready for a vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Lefevers.
Yes.
Commissioner Van Antwerp.
Yes.
Commissioner Benefield.
Aye.
And
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, especially you, Louise. Very good. My notes. I think I'll take them. What? Pen? Oh, the agenda. Here we go. We still have more. Wait a minute. Here.
You have exactly the right amount
All right, you guys, we're not done yet. You are.
We can leave?
Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have matters presented by commissioners?
Okay, let's wait till they clear out. I'm so pushy.
Okay. Maybe I'll wait for you outside. Thank you.
Do we have matters presented by commissioners?
Well, I wanted to say that I had a bunch of requests from Nick last time we met, and that you're so thorough. I mean, I really appreciate you took every one of those and dispelled them for me. I'm still a little concerned about the story poles on Dorrance, but I can live with that. So I just want to thank you for that.
You're very welcome. And they should be coming down now that the ARB has seen those projects last week.
And then director's report.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. Yes, so in your director's report this evening, you've got the Architecture Review Board meeting minutes from 3 of our meetings earlier this year. Looks like we had a little bit of a backlog to get in front of you. You also have the city calendar for the month of May, the planning activity report for the month of April, and the building permit report also as of the end of April. Probably the only thing there I wanted to highlight that was of significant note, again, is the 700 Linden project, now called the Linden Square project, is getting really, really, really close. All of the interior, the developer is working with the tenants to try to get the finishing touches put on the interiors so that a handful of the businesses can be ready to open concurrently, and the goal is to have those open later this month. So I'm excited for that. And I'll wrap it up there unless you have anything else for me.
Yeah, I plan to be available June 2nd.
Yeah, I'll be here. And you'll be here?
I'll be here.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, so Jane, you said you would not be here
I'll
for
not
June?
be here. I'll
Okay.
be in.
But the other 3 will be.
We're adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Go tape. I don't want